Hello, I'm Anna from Untold Stories, the channel where we uncover the hidden parts of history. Today, I'm taking you back to a courtroom that seemed ordinary, until one whisper changed everything. The judge asked her to speak louder, but what happened next left the entire room in stunned silence. What was behind that whisper? And why has it become a moment history cannot ignore? Join me as we uncover the true, little-known story. Judge asks her to speak louder, but one whisper silences the courtroom. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next untold story. The courtroom hummed with legal proceedings until Colonel Renata Blackthorne's patience snapped. "Speak louder, Miss Alira Marin," she commanded, irritation clear in her voice. The unassuming woman in civilian clothes leaned toward the microphone and whispered 5 words that changed everything. The effect was immediate. The judge's gavel clattered to the desk. Officers straightened in their seats and faces drained of color throughout the room. No one had expected a ghost to testify. No one had expected the sole survivor of a mission that officially never happened. No one had expected the truth. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If the story captivated you, please consider subscribing. We share powerful stories of unsung heroes every week. The military courthouse buzzed with the low murmur of legal proceedings. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust particles in the air and casting long shadows across the polished floor. The room smelled of furniture polish and tension. It was late morning on what promised to be another unremarkable day of testimony in the case of United States First Major Dorian Cailwin. Alira Marin sat in the back row, deliberately unremarkable in her navy blazer and modest blouse. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. No makeup adorning her olive-toned skin, mid-40s, with a face that spoke of experience rather than age. Her calm, watchful eyes took in everything, while her presence demanded nothing. To a casual observer, she might have been anyone, a journalist perhaps, or a curious law student. She occasionally made notes in a small leather-bound notebook, her hands steady and precise. Unlike the military personnel and legal teams who filled most of the room with their uniforms and formal attire, she wore no visible markers of rank or position. Just a civilian, it seemed, with an interest in military justice. The case before the court involved Major Dorian Cailwin, accused of mishandling classified information and negligence that allegedly led to the deaths of 5 operatives during Operation Stormfall 3 years prior. The operation had made brief headlines at the time. A failed extraction, a team lost, questions raised, and then quickly buried under the weight of national security concerns. Lieutenant Alaric Rowan, a young a prosecutor with something to prove, delivered his arguments with practiced intensity, gesturing emphatically toward exhibits displaying tactical maps and mission parameters. Major Cailwin had clear protocols to follow regarding extraction of the team, Rowan asserted, his voice carrying throughout the courtroom. His decision to abort the mission directly resulted in the team being left without support in hostile territory. Major Cailwin sat rigid at the defense table, his face a careful mask. A decorated officer with 15 years of service. He looked diminished somehow in his dress uniform, as if the weight of the proceedings had physically compressed him. Alira watched it all, her expression revealing nothing. Only the occasional tightening of her fingers around her pen suggested any emotional response to the proceedings. When Colonel Renata Blackthorne called the next witness, heads turned in mild surprise as Alira stood from her seat in the back row. "The prosecution calls Alira Marin," Lieutenant Rowan announced. She moved to the stand with a deliberate grace that seemed at odds with her civilian appearance. Something about her posture, spine straight, shoulders square, chin slightly elevated, caught the attention of a silver-haired veteran seated near the front. He frowned slightly, studying her with newfound interest. Colonel Blackthorne, sharp-featured and meticulous, watched her with narrowed eyes as she took the oath. The judge was known for her no-nonsense approach and efficiency in court proceedings. Today, she wore her authority like armor, her judicial robes crisp and immaculate. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," instructed Colonel Blackthorne. Alira Marin, intelligence analyst, civilian contractor. Her voice was soft but clear, her posture perfect. Lieutenant Rowan began his questioning, and Alira's responses were factual and precise, but delivered in such a measured, quiet tone that Colonel Blackthorne soon grew visibly impatient. Several times, the court reporter had to ask her to repeat her statements. "Ms. Marin," Colonel Blackthorne finally interrupted. "The court reporter needs to hear your testimony clearly. Please speak up." "Yes, Your Honor," Alira responded, barely raising her volume. Lieutenant Rowan continued. "Ms. Marin, can you explain your involvement with the intelligence assessment for Operation Stormfall? I reviewed satellite imagery and human intelligence reports concerning the target location." She replied, her voice still frustratingly soft. "I provided analysis on likely opposition forces and terrain challenges." "And what were your findings?" "I determined that the extraction would face significant challenges due to mountainous terrain and limited approach vectors. I also noted discrepancies between different intelligence sources regarding local militia strength." "Did you document these concerns?" "Yes. I submitted a formal assessment recommending additional reconnaissance before proceeding." "Was that recommendation followed?" "It was not." The defense attorney, Major Cedric Viril, approached for cross-examination with a dismissive air. Tall and imposing with prematurely silver temples that lent him an air of distinction. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling a room. "Ms. Marin, what was your specific role regarding Operation Stormfall?" "I reviewed intelligence briefings related to the operation's target location." "And you have what level of clearance?" "Exactly." His tone suggested the answer would confirm her irrelevance. "I had sufficient clearance for my assigned tasks." Alira responded evenly. Major Viril smiled thinly. "Ms. Marin, how could you possibly understand the complexities of a classified extraction operation when you were merely analyzing data remotely?" Something flickered across Colonel Blackthorne's face. A brief shadow of recognition quickly suppressed. She studied Alira more intently now. "Objection. Argumentative." Lieutenant Rowan called out. "Sustained." Colonel Blackthorne replied, her eyes never leaving Alira. Major Viril adjusted his approach. "Let me rephrase. What direct field experience do you have with tactical operations in hostile territory?" Alira paused before answering, her eyes briefly meeting those of the silver-haired veteran in the gallery. "My background includes field assessment experience," she said carefully. Alira leaned closer to the microphone and whispered, "Phantom Sierra 72 Alpha." The effect was immediate and electric. Colonel Renata Blackthorne's gavel slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly on the desk. Several military officers in attendance physically straightened in their seats as if receiving a command. Major Dorian Kalewin's face drained of color. The silver-haired veteran in the gallery stood up involuntarily, then slowly sat back down. Complete silence fell over the courtroom as recognition dawned across various faces. Some looked confused, others shocked, and a few, those who understood the significance of those words, appeared stricken. Alira continued in the same soft voice, but now everyone was straining to hear. "I was the extraction specialist on Operation Stormfall. I was also the only survivor of Operation Phantom Sierra, which Colonel Blackthorne personally authorized 3 years before." She methodically produced a worn, blood-stained tactical notebook from her bag and held it up for the court to see. "This contains the actual operational directives for Stormfall, not the falsified ones presented in this court. Major Kalewin isn't responsible for those deaths. He was following direct orders from command to abandon the team after they discovered evidence of weapon sales to hostile forces." Colonel Blackthorne attempted to call for order but found her voice failing her. "Ms. Marin, Commander, this is highly irregular. My team and I were declared Kia," Alira continued calmly. "I was the only survivor. I've spent 3 years gathering evidence and waiting for this moment. Not for revenge, but for the truth." A younger officer near the back of the courtroom stood up. "This is absurd. Commander Marin died in Operation Phantom Sierra. I attended her memorial service." The silver-haired veteran turned to address him. "Sit down, Captain," he said quietly. "Look at her eyes. No one forgets those eyes." Alira opened the notebook to reveal photographs, coordinates, and handwritten field notes. The team was abandoned because they discovered Lieutenant General Garrick Hadrian was selling tactical weapons to insurgent forces through a private contractor, the same contractor who provided the faulty intelligence that sent us into a trap. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Colonel Blackthorne pounded her gavel repeatedly, finally restoring some semblance of order. Her face had lost all color and her hand trembled visibly. "This court will recess for 30 minutes, she declared, her voice unsteady. But before anyone could move, Alira spoke again. "With respect, Colonel, I've waited 3 years to speak. I'll finish now." Colonel Blackthorne slowly sat back down, her authority visibly shaken. She nodded once, a gesture of reluctant permission. "Operation Phantom Sierra was classified above top secret," Alira continued. "Our mission was to identify the source of advanced weapons appearing in conflict zones that match specifications of prototype American systems. We traced the weapons to a warehouse facility outside Tabri. What we found there was a sophisticated distribution network with documents linking directly to General Hadrian." She turned a page in her notebook and removed a microfilm canister. "This contains transaction records, weapon serial numbers, and bank transfers. We transmitted this intelligence before we were compromised. That transmission was intercepted and buried. Our extraction was cancelled. We were left to die." Major Kaelwyn stood, his voice hollow. "I received direct orders from General Hadrian to abort. He said the team had been confirmed Kia already." "We weren't," Alira said simply. "We were very much alive and calling for extraction. I heard your voice on the comm, Major Kaelwyn. You sounded confused, but you followed orders." Lieutenant Alaric Rowan approached Alira cautiously. "Commander Marin, if what you're saying is true, how did you survive? And why wait 3 years to come forward?" Alira's composure never wavered. "I survived because I was separated from my team during the final firefight. I was wounded, unconscious, presumed dead. A local shepherd found me and kept me hidden while I recovered. By then, the official story was established. My team was dead. The mission had never existed, and General Hadrian had been promoted." She looked around the courtroom, meeting the eyes of several senior officers. "I needed time to gather evidence that couldn't be buried again. I needed to understand who knew about the betrayal and who was simply following orders. Most importantly, I needed to make sure the families of my team would finally learn the truth." The silver-haired veteran approached the front of the courtroom. "Your Honor, request permission to address the court." Colonel Blackthorne nodded, seemingly grateful for the interruption. "I am Colonel Octavian Vexley, retired. I was the training officer for the Phantom Sierra team." He turned to face Alira. "Commander Marin was one of the finest operators I ever trained. If she says her team was betrayed, I believe her without question." Major Cedric Viral interjected. "This is all highly dramatic, but it has no bearing on the case before us. Major Kaelwyn is charged with negligence regarding Operation Stormfall, not some classified mission from years ago." "They're connected," Alira replied. "Operation Stormfall was deliberately compromised because the team was getting too close to the same weapons network. History repeating itself. Different team, same betrayal, same source." She pulled another document from her notebook. "This is a communication log showing that Major Kaelwyn requested confirmation of the abort order 3 times. He was told explicitly that disobeying would result in court-martial. He wasn't negligent. He was manipulated." Colonel Blackthorne studied the document, her judicial demeanor cracking further. "These logs weren't included in the evidence presented to this court, because they were deliberately removed," Alira said. "Just like the intelligence I submitted was removed from Major Kaelwyn's briefing." The courtroom had grown absolutely still. Every person present aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, staring at Alira with undisguised astonishment. Lieutenant Rowan approached the bench. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the prosecution requests a recess to review these materials and potentially reassess the charges against Major Kaelwyn." Colonel Blackthorne nodded absently, her attention still fixed on Alira. Granted. This court will recess until tomorrow morning at 0900. She paused, then added, Commander Marin will remain under the protection of the court until then. As people began to rise, Alira spoke again. There's something else you should know, Colonel. She removed a final document from her notebook. This is the original authorization for Operation Phantom Sierra with your signature. And this, she produced another paper, is the abort order that condemned my team. The signatures don't match. Colonel Blackthorne took both documents with trembling hands. Someone forged my signature on the abort order, she whispered, shock evident in her voice. Yes, Alira confirmed. You've been carrying guilt for a decision you never made. Colonel Vexley moved closer. I always wondered why you would abandon that team. It didn't align with anything I knew about your character. Ren. Colonel Blackthorne looked up, tears forming in her eyes. I've spent 3 years believing I made a call that got 5 good people killed. I approved the mission, but I never, ever authorized abandoning them. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and a team of military police entered, led by a stern-faced brigadier general. What is the meaning of this interruption? Colonel Renata Blackthorne demanded, quickly regaining her composure. Colonel Blackthorne, I'm Brigadier General Thorne Foster from the Inspector General's office. We received an anonymous package yesterday containing evidence of serious breaches of military law involving Lieutenant General Garrick Hadrian. I understand there may be connected testimony occurring in this courtroom today. Alira smiled faintly. Right on time, she murmured. General Foster approached her. You would be Commander Marin? I would. We have a great many questions for you, Commander. And I have answers, General. 3 years' worth. The General turned to address Colonel Blackthorne. With the court's permission, I'd like to take custody of the evidence Commander Marin has presented and arrange for her protection pending a full investigation. Colonel Blackthorne nodded. Granted, but I want to be kept fully informed. It appears I have been an unwitting party to this situation. The courtroom began to clear, but Major Dorian Kalewin remained seated, looking shell-shocked. Alira approached him quietly. I don't understand, he said, looking up at her. Why would you help me? I'm the one who left your team behind in Stormfall. Because you were another victim of the same corruption, she replied simply. You followed what you believed were legitimate orders. The guilt should rest with those who manipulated you. How can you be so certain? Alira allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Because I've spent 3 years studying every detail of what happened. I know who gave the orders and why. I know who altered intelligence reports and who profited from the weapon sales. Most importantly, I know you requested confirmation 3 times because you suspected something was wrong. Major Kalewin's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Those communications were encrypted. I had help, Alira admitted. Not everyone in intelligence was compromised. There are still good people within the system who wanted the truth to come out. As she turned to leave with General Foster, the silver-haired Colonel Octavian Vexley approached. Commander, he said formally, then dropped his voice. Alira, we buried you. I spoke at your memorial. I know, she replied quietly. I read the transcript. Thank you for your kind words. What happens now? Alira looked around the emptying courtroom, her eyes lingering on the faces of those who remained. Colonel Blackthorne, still visibly shaken. Major Kalewin contemplating his potential exoneration. Lieutenant Alaric Rowan reassessing everything he thought he knew about the case. Now, she said, the truth finally has a chance. The courtroom remained frozen in a tableau of shock and revelation. Colonel Blackthorne slowly set down her gavel and removed her judicial robes, stepping down from the bench to stand on the same level as Alira. The court will recognize Commander Alira Marin, presumed killed in action, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, she announced formally, her voice carrying a weight of regret and respect. Colonel Vexley approached Alira and rendered a perfect salute. Others throughout the courtroom followed suit, a ripple of silent acknowledgement spreading through the room. Military personnel who had moments ago regarded her with skepticism now stood at attention, honoring a fallen comrade returned from the dead. Major Kalewin, visibly shaken, stood to address Alira directly. I never knew who gave the order. I've been carrying this for 3 years. They told me the team had already been lost when I called off the extraction. I know, Alira replied. Your voice on the comm that day. I heard your hesitation. You questioned the order. 3 times, he confirmed, his voice breaking slightly. They told me I was risking more lives by proceeding with the extraction, that the intelligence had confirmed the entire team had been killed in the initial blast. Colonel Blackthorn's professional demeanor cracked as she turned to face the court. I authorized the original Operation Phantom Sierra based on intelligence that indicated a high-value target. I did not authorize the abandonment order that came later. The signature was forged. You've been living with guilt that was never yours to bear, Alira confirmed. Brigadier General Foster stepped forward. Colonel, I'd like to request a formal pause in these proceedings while we secure this evidence and establish proper protocols for what happens next. This has national security implications that extend far beyond this courtroom. Colonel Blackthorn nodded. This court will adjourn until further notice. Major Kalewin, in light of the evidence presented, you are released from custody pending review of all charges. As military police began securing the room and escorting people out, Alira opened her notebook and carefully laid out photographs showing Lieutenant General Hadrian meeting with known arms dealers. This was never about punishment, she said softly, addressing the room at large. It was about clearing the names of those who died following orders and holding accountable those who betrayed them. She turned to face a small group seated in the gallery. Relatives of the fallen operatives she'd served with. A middle-aged woman with her son's eyes. A father wearing his daughter's memorial pin. A young man who had his brother's jawline. They had attended this hearing believing it concerned strangers, not knowing their loved ones' fates were intertwined with this case. Your family members discovered corruption at the highest levels, Alira told them, approaching slowly. They were abandoned because they chose honor over silence. They deserve to be remembered for their courage, not as victims of negligence. The woman stood, uncertainty and hope warring in her expression. You knew my son? Staff Sergeant Ellen Reeves. Yes, Alira answered gently. He was our communications specialist, brilliant with encryption. He was the one who first decoded the shipping manifests that exposed the weapons trafficking. They told us it was an accident, a miscalculation. It wasn't, Alira said firmly. Your son was a hero who discovered something powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Colonel Vexley joined them. Mrs. Reeves, I trained your son. He was exceptional. What Commander Marin is saying, if she has evidence that his death wasn't as we were told, I have everything, Alira assured them. Every piece of evidence they tried to bury with us. Brigadier General Foster approached with several officers. Commander Marin, we need to secure that evidence immediately and get your formal statement. Alira nodded. I understand, General. But first, these families deserve to know the truth. They've waited 3 years. Foster studied her for a moment, then nodded. 1 hour, Commander. Then we need to move this to a secure facility. As the courtroom emptied, Alira remained with the families, Colonel Vexley, Colonel Blackthorn, and Major Kalewin. She opened her bag and removed a sealed waterproof case. I kept records of everything, she explained. Field notes, mission logs, transmission records. When I realized what was happening, that we were being abandoned, I made sure to document it all. How did you survive? Asked the young man, who resembled his brother. When the building was hit, I was in the communications room with Staff Sergeant Reeves. The blast threw me clear, but the rest of the team was trapped inside. I tried to get back to them, but insurgents were closing in. I was wounded, losing blood. The last thing I remember is hearing Major Kalewin's voice over the comm system, apologizing as he called off the extraction. Major Kalewin closed his eyes, the memory clearly painful. I woke up 3 days later in a shepherd's hut. An old man and his grandson had found me half dead in a ravine and hidden me from the militia group searching the area. By the time I recovered enough to move, the official story had already been established. "Why not come forward immediately?" Colonel Blackthorne asked. "Because I didn't know who to trust," Alira replied simply. The mission was classified beyond top secret. The only people who knew about it were either dead or potentially involved in the cover-up. I needed time to understand the full scope of the corruption and gather evidence that couldn't be easily dismissed. She turned to the father wearing his daughter's memorial pin. "Lieutenant Farron was our medic. She treated my wounds before the building collapsed. Her last act was to apply a tourniquet that ultimately saved my life." The man nodded, fighting tears. "That sounds like her." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows, Colonel Blackthorne approached with official documentation. "We're reopening the investigation. Their records will be amended to show they died with honor." Colonel Vexley finally spoke what had been weighing on him. "I was their training officer," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've carried this guilt for years, believing I hadn't prepared them well enough." "You prepared us perfectly, Colonel Vexley," Alira replied. "You taught us that our mission was always about protecting the truth, not just following orders." "What happens to General Hadrian?" Major Kalewin asked. Brigadier General Foster, who had been conferring with his team, rejoined the conversation. "Based on the preliminary evidence Commander Marin has provided, we've already secured a warrant for his detainment and questioning. He's being taken into custody as we speak." "It won't be simple," Alira warned. "He has powerful allies, people who profited from these weapon sales." "Perhaps not," Foster acknowledged. "But thanks to your documentation, we have a starting point that can't be easily buried this time." As evening approached, the group moved outside. The golden light of sunset bathed the courthouse steps. As Alira stood with the families of her fallen team members, from her bag she removed carefully preserved personal effects. A compass, a worn photograph, a lucky coin, dog tags, a handwritten letter, and presented each to the appropriate family. "They carried these until the end," she told them, "and they never gave up hope that the truth would come out." The mother who had lost her son held his compass tightly. "He always knew his way home," she whispered. "He found his way home through you," Alira said gently. "Everything I've done these past 3 years was to make sure their sacrifice wasn't forgotten or distorted." As the families embraced her with tears and gratitude, Colonel Renata Blackthorne approached once more. "Commander Marin, the Pentagon will want to debrief you." Alira nodded. "I'll be ready. But first, these families needed to know who their loved ones really were." "And Major Kalewin?" Blackthorne asked quietly. "He deserves exoneration," Alira replied firmly. "He was another victim in this. The evidence I've provided proves he followed what he believed were legitimate orders, and that he questioned those orders multiple times." Major Dorian Kalewin approached hesitantly. "I still don't understand why you would help me. For 3 years, I've believed I was responsible for abandoning your team. Because blame belongs with those who gave the orders, not those who were manipulated into following them," Alira explained. "You've been carrying guilt that was never yours to bear, just as Colonel Blackthorne has." She descended the courthouse steps alone, her shadow stretching long behind her, the shadow of a soldier standing at attention rather than an anonymous civilian. For a moment, she paused to look back at the courthouse where justice had finally begun to take shape. The families were being escorted to waiting vehicles. Colonel Blackthorne was deep in conversation with Brigadier General Thorne Foster. Colonel Octavian Vexley watched her from the top of the steps, his face reflecting a complex mix of pride and regret. Alira gave him a small nod before continuing down the steps. Her mission wasn't quite complete. There would be debriefings, formal investigations, possibly even congressional hearings. The full scope of the corruption would need to be exposed and those responsible held accountable. But the most important part was done. The truth was out and the fallen had been reclaimed from obscurity. As she reached the bottom of the steps, a military aide approached. "Commander Marin, General Foster has arranged secure transport for you. If you'll come this way." She followed the aide to a waiting vehicle, conscious of the eyes following her progress. Military personnel, courthouse staff, curious onlookers. For 3 years, She had lived in shadows, unremarkable and unnoticed. Now she walked in the light, her identity reclaimed, her purpose fulfilled. The older veteran caught up with her just before she reached the vehicle. "Commander," he said quietly, "what you did, surviving, gathering evidence, coming forward, it was extraordinary." "I had a duty to my team," she replied simply. "It was more than duty," he insisted. "It was courage of the highest order." Alira allowed herself a small smile. "You taught us well, Colonel." "I taught you tactics and protocols," he corrected. "What you showed today, that came from within." He watched her go, then turned to Colonel Blackthorne, who had joined him. "Some heroes never wear their medals," he said quietly. "They just carry the weight of them." Colonel Blackthorne nodded. "And some truths whisper louder than any shout." The golden evening light continued to fade as Alira's vehicle pulled away from the courthouse. Behind her, families began the long-delayed process of healing. Ahead lay the challenge of ensuring justice was fully served. But for now, in this moment, between what was and what would be, the simple act of truth had transformed a courtroom of strangers into witnesses to something profound. The power of one person's quiet determination to right a wrong that powerful forces had tried to bury forever. 3 days later, inside a secure conference room at Fort Branswick, Commander Alira Marin sat across from a panel of senior officials and intelligence officers. Behind her was a locked briefcase containing the entirety of the evidence she had spent 3 years collecting. Across from her sat Brigadier General Thorne Foster, Colonel Renata Blackthorne, Colonel Octavian Vexley, and a representative from the Department of Defense's Internal Affairs Unit, Director Helen Mortain. The room was windowless, its walls soundproofed. A single recorder sat in the center of the table. "For the record," Director Mortain said, "we are conducting a formal intake debrief with Commander Alira Marin regarding classified operations known as Phantom Sierra and Stormfall. Commander, are you prepared to proceed?" "Yes," Alira replied. "Everything you hear from me today will be backed by documentation, witness statements, signal logs, and chain-of-command records." "We've reviewed some of what you submitted already," Foster said. "It's explosive, Commander. If it holds up under full scrutiny, it will result in multiple courts-martial, congressional hearings, and perhaps even criminal charges." "It will hold up," Alira said. "I made sure of that." Colonel Vexley leaned forward. "Start at the beginning. Phantom Sierra." Alira nodded. 3 years ago, I was assigned to a Tier 1 Black Op under direct authorization of then-Colonel Renata Blackthorne. Our objective was to trace the origin of prototype weapons showing up in multiple conflict zones. The intelligence suggested a rogue distribution network, potentially with connections inside our own procurement channels. "What was the operational team makeup?" asked Mortain. 6 operators. Myself as Field Intelligence and Extraction. Staff Sergeant Ellen Reeves, Comms. Lieutenant Myria Farron, Medic. Sergeant Tomas Quell, Demolitions. Corporal Nico Strassen, Recon. And Captain Luke Vanner, Team Lead. "Go on," Foster said. "We tracked shipments through 3 continents. The trail eventually led us to a staging facility near Tabri. We confirmed the presence of weapon crates marked with serial numbers linked to experimental U.S. tech. There were also logs of transactions, digital and paper, showing transfers to hostile factions. The intel was transmitted to CENTCOM encrypted through our priority comm channel. Then the ambush," Vexley added quietly. "Yes, less than 12 hours later. The facility was bombed. Not by enemy ordnance, but by a drone strike. Ours. The coordinates were marked with a priority abort beacon just hours after our signal went out." "And the extraction?" asked Colonel Blackthorne, her voice low. "Cancelled. We were told later that you had authorized it. I now know you didn't." Alira looked at her directly. "Someone forged your signature to ensure our team was silenced." "You were the only one who survived," Mortain said. "Correct. I was in the comms room with Sergeant Reeves when the first blast hit. He shielded me. I was thrown clear. Wounded, unconscious. I was rescued by a civilian who hid me for weeks until I could walk. By the time I resurfaced, the mission didn't exist, and my team had been memorialized as Kia. Why not come to command then? Foster asked. I couldn't trust the chain. If Hadrian had the power to alter operational records and abort top-secret missions, I had to assume others were compromised too. So I disappeared and started tracing every lead I could find. Bank accounts, procurement contracts, arms dealer connections. It all led back to Hadrian and his corporate contacts. And Operation Stormfall? Mortain asked. It was the same pattern. Different mission, same contractor. Intelligence was altered to downplay opposition strength. Kaelwyn was given an incomplete briefing. When the team got too close to another weapons shipment, the op was sabotaged. Were you embedded in that operation? Blackthorn asked. Only in the intelligence loop. But I recognized the signs. I started connecting the dots. And that phrase, Vexley said. Phantom Sierra 72 Alpha. Why use it in the courtroom? Because it was our last secure call sign, Elira said. Only someone from that team or in direct command would recognize it instantly. It was proof of identity. What's the significance of the 72 Alpha variant? Foster asked. It was a fail-safe directive. If compromised, the team was authorized to expose chain of command tampering through designated protocols. Had we survived and reached extraction, that phrase would have triggered full audit authority. And yet no audit ever occurred, Mortain noted. Because we never made it to extraction, Elira said. Until now. And this evidence you've gathered, Foster said, gesturing to the briefcase. It includes everything? Everything, Elira confirmed. Comms logs, forged orders, financial records, drone telemetry, even intercepted emails from Hadrian's associates. You understand what comes next? Director Mortain asked. Investigations, tribunals, maybe even Senate hearings. Yes, Elira said. And I'm ready for it. But I want one thing in return. What's that? Blackthorn asked. That my team's names are cleared, Elira said. Their records corrected. Their service honored. And that no future unit is ever abandoned the way we were. Colonel Vexley's voice broke slightly. You have my word on that. Foster stood. Then let's begin the audit. Commander Marin, your duty may have been buried, but it was never forgotten. Let's bring the truth into the light. 3 weeks later, in a closed hearing room at the Pentagon, Commander Elira Marin stood once again. This time not as a ghost from the past, but as the primary witness in the largest military corruption inquiry in over a decade. Behind her sat a panel of uniformed officers, senators, and intelligence officials. Cameras were absent, but every word spoken was being recorded and transcribed. Brigadier General Thorne Foster opened the session. Commander Marin, you are testifying today under oath as part of the Department of Defense's inquiry into classified operations Phantom Sierra and Stormfall, and the actions of Lieutenant General Garrick Hadrian and associated contractors. Do you understand the scope of this proceeding? I do, Elira replied. You've already provided classified materials in secured briefing sessions. Today's session is about the chain of responsibility, operational intent, and command structure. Let's begin with your first-hand account of the decision to abort Phantom Sierra, said Senator Alaric Wells. Elira nodded. On the day of the strike, our team had secured evidence of unauthorized weapons distribution. The facility near Tabriz contained both physical weapons and digital records linking them to an American contractor. Within 6 hours of transmitting our intel to CENTCOM, the facility was destroyed by a drone strike marked as a cleanup protocol. Our extraction was canceled under the pretense of a Kia declaration, based on forged confirmation. And you allege that General Hadrian orchestrated this cover-up? Asked Rear Admiral Desmond Callow. I do more than allege. I've submitted forged documents bearing General Hadrian's alias signatures, intercepted communications, and financial transfers to shell companies connected to arms brokers operating in the region. The same shell companies appeared again during Operation Stormfall. And what was Stormfall's objective? Asked Senator Wells. Stormfall was framed as an intelligence retrieval mission. In truth, it was designed to recover or silence a second team that had uncovered parts of the same weapons trail. Major Dorian Kaelwyn was misled, briefed with incomplete intelligence, and pressured into aborting the extraction under threat of court-martial. You testified that he requested confirmation 3 times, Foster said. Yes, I have those logs. Each time, he was told the team was already lost, and that proceeding would jeopardize another operation. That was false. The team was alive when he made those calls. Did General Hadrian sign the abort order for Stormfall? Asked Callow. No. He had a subordinate issue it through backchannel clearance, then covered it under a blanket security seal. Where is General Hadrian now? Wells asked. In custody, Foster answered. He was detained 2 weeks ago under direct order of the Secretary of Defense. He's currently facing charges of dereliction, conspiracy, and treason. And your role, Commander? Mortain asked from the side. I was listed as Kia. My role since then has been gathering the truth and restoring the names of my fallen team. Do you believe this conspiracy went beyond General Hadrian? Wells asked. I believe it reached into multiple levels of procurement and black budget oversight. But Hadrian was the linchpin. Without him, the network loses its military legitimacy. And your evidence has been corroborated? Callow asked. By independent review, yes. The signal logs, forensic document analysis, financial traces, all verified. There was silence for a moment. Then Foster turned to the panel. I submit to the committee that Commander Marin's testimony and documentation are credible, complete, and grounds for comprehensive reform. Senator Wells leaned forward. Commander Marin, I want you to know this committee owes you a debt. You risked your life to uncover betrayal and bring the truth forward. What you've done, quietly, methodically, embodies the highest ideals of service. Alira inclined her head. I didn't do it alone. My team, those who died, and those who stood by me when I returned, they carried this with me. Your recommendations for moving forward? Mortain asked. Audit the private contractor programs. Reevaluate backchannel clearance policies. Reinforce accountability for special operations oversight. And most of all, protect those who speak up. You've earned more than medals, Commander, said Admiral Callow. You've earned trust. Then I'll use it to make sure this never happens again, Alira said. As the hearing adjourned, she stepped out into the corridor where Colonel Renata Blackthorne and Colonel Octavian Vexley waited. Vexley offered her a quiet nod. You did it. No, Alira replied. We did, and we're not done yet. The official exoneration of Major Dorian Kaelwyn came 2 weeks after the Pentagon hearing. The charges were dropped, and his military record was amended to reflect the truth. He had acted under manipulated orders and in good faith. A private ceremony was held at Fort Branswick where his name was cleared in the presence of key witnesses, Commander Alira Marin, Colonel Renata Blackthorne, and Brigadier General Thorne Foster. Alira stood silently to the side as Kaelwyn received the official commendation for integrity under duress. When it was over, he approached her. I still remember the comms, he said. I still hear your voice, barely audible through static. You were calling for extraction, and I couldn't get to you. You tried, Alira said, and that's more than most. It still doesn't feel like enough. It wasn't your burden to begin with. Will it ever feel like justice? Kaelwyn asked. When those responsible are behind bars, Alira replied. When our fallen are remembered for their courage, not for how they died. He looked toward the folded flag on the stand beside the stage. I used to think medals mattered. Now I just want the silence to end. Then keep telling the truth, she said. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. That same week, military tribunals began against key figures implicated by Alira's evidence. 2 procurement officers were arrested for falsifying contract documents. A former intelligence advisor resigned under scrutiny. The contractor at the center of the scandal, Kestrel Dynamics, was suspended from all defense contracts pending criminal investigation. Lieutenant General Garrick Hadrian remained in solitary detention awaiting trial. His legal team requested closed-door hearings citing national security, but public pressure mounted for transparency. Meanwhile, across bases and command centers, whispers turned to conversations. Officers revisited protocols. Analysts combed through archive data. Quiet reforms began. Alira refused all media interviews, choosing instead to spend her days with the families of the Phantom Sierra team. She traveled to their hometowns, delivering personal effects, sharing stories, answering hard questions. In a church basement in Vermont, she sat with Sergeant Ellen Reeves's parents and showed them the notebook he had kept, half tech specs, half bad poetry. "He never let us read his writing," his mother said through tears. "Now we finally can." In a quiet park in Oregon, she met Lieutenant Myria Farron's younger sister and gave her the field medic's kit, still marked with her initials. "She saved me," Alira said, with her last breath. And in a high school gym in rural Kansas, she stood beside the plaque bearing Corporal Nico Strassen's name and told the assembled students, "Your classmate died uncovering the truth. That's a legacy worth more than any headline." Word of her efforts spread within the military community. Not officially, not publicly, but enough that others began reaching out. Anonymous tips, encrypted files, quiet knocks on safehouse doors. People who had seen too much and said too little were finding their voices. Alira met each one without judgment, only asking, "Do you want the truth known, or do you want it gone?" Most chose the truth. On a cold morning, as frost clung to the edges of the Pentagon's marble steps, Alira received a letter. Not through official channels but slipped into her hand by a passing civilian. It bore no return address, only a typewritten message. "You weren't supposed to survive. But now that you have, keep going. They haven't all fallen yet." She burned the letter that night, memorized every word, and added a new entry to her encrypted journal. "The silence is breaking. Keep listening." In the months that followed, her name became a quiet presence in intelligence circles. Not feared, not glorified, simply respected. Not because she exposed corruption, but because she reminded them that even in a world of shadows, some truths still demand to be heard. 6 months later, in a conference room deep within NATO's Brussels Command Center, Commander Alira Marin stood before a secure panel of Allied defense leaders. She was no longer anonymous, no longer presumed dead, and no longer merely a witness. She was now a strategic advisor on operational integrity and intelligence reform. The chair of the session, Marshal Ingrid Vessen of the Dutch Air Forces, addressed the group. This closed briefing concerns the continued dismantling of the weapons distribution network previously concealed under Operations Phantom Sierra and Stormfall. Commander Marin has the floor. Alira nodded, then activated the central holodeck. A series of maps, dossiers, and procurement chains appeared in layered sequences. As of today, 11 shell corporations tied to Kestrel Dynamics have been frozen. 3 procurement directors across allied nations have been relieved of duty. Cross-border traces continue to link illicit weapons to 5 conflict zones in the last 2 years. "Have we confirmed how deep the manipulation went?" asked General Matteo Russo of the French Joint Staff. "We're still tracing it," Alira said, "but the pattern is consistent. Falsified intelligence used to justify operations, followed by a delayed or sabotaged extraction once the team identifies irregularities." "And internal leaks?" asked Commander Arne Stoll of Germany. "Some," Alira replied, "but most of the cover-ups were done through forged authorizations and sealed orders routed through compromised contractors. The manipulation wasn't widespread, but it was strategic, focused, surgical." "Your testimony led to the disbanding of Kestrel Dynamics," Marshal Vessen said. "That was just the first cut," Alira replied. "Others will come. Different names. Same playbook." "What do you recommend?" asked Russo. "Operational redundancy," Alira said. "Intelligence reviews by independent units. Field verification protocols. And above all, mandated delays before any abort order is executed. Enough time to confirm with multiple sources." "You're asking us to slow reaction time in combat," said Commander Stoll. "I'm asking you to weigh lives against haste," Alira said without hesitation. "Some of us don't get a second chance to speak up." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Finally, Vessen spoke. "You've come back from the dead, Commander. What keeps you in this fight?" Alira looked at the data spread before them. Because the people who tried to bury us aren't all gone. Because the families I've met deserve more than apologies. And because truth doesn't survive on its own. It has to be defended, even when no one's watching. Vesson gave a small nod. You have allies here, Commander. Quiet ones. But loyal. That's all I've ever needed. As the session adjourned, Alira collected her documents and stepped into the corridor. Outside, winter clouds rolled across the Belgian sky. She walked past portraits of past commanders, past statues of long-forgotten generals, and paused only once, before the glass wall overlooking the city. In the reflection, she saw herself not in shadow, not in uniform, but standing steady. A survivor, a soldier without a war but still in the fight. Her encrypted phone buzzed. A single message. Intercepted chatter from old Kestrel contact. New shell company. New contracts. Sending details. Alira turned away from the window, already moving. The silence hadn't ended. But neither had her mission. Alira Marin didn't sleep the night after confirming Adrian Valrek was alive. She didn't need to. Clarity had replaced exhaustion. The truth had finally crystallized into something actionable. Phantom Sierra wasn't a tragedy of circumstance. It was a coordinated purge. Valrek had overseen the logistics. Hadrian had approved the cover-up. And others, still in the shadows, had profited. The next morning, she met Captain Melis Gruber at a secure facility near Graz. Interpol wants to move, Gruber said. They're nervous. Valrek's name has weight, even dead. They can't move yet, Alira replied. I need his network, not just his name. You want to take him alive? I want him to speak. On record. That afternoon, she infiltrated the depot under a false contractor ID with clearance credentials seated by Blackthorne herself. Inside, the operation was broader than she feared. Tech not only American but Italian, German, even Turkish. Black market software, encryption modules, field-ready drones. Enough to destabilize a region. And Valrek oversaw every transaction from his glass-walled office. Alira planted voice-activated recorders, a signal relay, and a hidden lens with biometric capture. She initiated a staged security alert, forcing Valrek to call 3 separate regional contacts for coordination. Each call recorded, each number traced. 36 hours later, the entire network map was visible. 6 shell companies, for senior officers across NATO, 2 political liaisons in foreign ministries. Colonel Blackthorne, sitting beside Brigadier General Thorne Foster, reviewed the intel and said only one word, execute. At 0400, coordinated raids took place across 5 countries. In Graz, Alira and a joint Euro defense unit stormed the depot. It was swift, precise. Valrek was apprehended before he could erase his drive. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. The look in his eyes told Alira he recognized her. Not as a ghost, as the consequence he'd failed to bury. Later, in a sealed interrogation room, he finally spoke. You don't understand what we were trying to build. You weren't building anything, Alira said. You were dismantling accountability one mission at a time. We created stability. Supply equals control. You created graves, she replied. And now it's time to answer for them. When the tribunal commenced, Alira testified one last time. She laid out the structure of betrayal, the manufacturing of war under false intelligence, the murder of operatives under the guise of national security. Her voice never wavered. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. This time, everyone listened. When the verdict came down, life imprisonment without parole, Valrek didn't blink. He knew it had been coming since the day Alira Marin crawled out of that ravine and chose to survive. After the hearings, Colonel Blackthorne approached her outside the courtroom. It's over, she said. For them, Alira answered. Not for me. You can rest now. Not until I make sure no one ever rewrites their sacrifice again. Blackthorne nodded. Then I'll walk beside you a little longer. Weeks passed. NATO implemented sweeping reforms. Oversight mechanisms changed. Private contractors were revetted. Families of Phantom Sierra received full military honors. Their names were etched into the Wall of Valor. And above all, the phrase Phantom Sierra 72 Alpha was declassified, not as a code name for a lost op, but as a symbol of truth spoken softly and finally heard. One evening, Alira returned to the original base where her team had trained. She walked the silent halls, pausing at each empty bunk. She placed a coin on each bed. Reeves's encryption coin, Quell's lucky charm, Farron's stitched patch. One for each of them. When she reached the last one, her own, she laid down a folded page from her notebook. On it, she had written, "Truth is not a weapon. It is a light, and we were never meant to live in the dark." Then she stepped outside, into the fading daylight, the wind catching her coat, her silhouette framed against the setting sun. Her mission was over, but her purpose, her oath, would never end. Because as long as there were lies dressed in flags, she would still be listening, still watching. And when the silence tried to fall again, Alira Marin would be there to break it.